Hi, this is my TOK essay breakdown series for May 2024. In these videos, I'll be unpacking the key terms and ideas from the title, as well as looking at the question through the lens of two areas of knowledge. For a much more detailed analysis, examples, and ideas for how to approach this title using the different AOKs and other TOK concepts, feel free to check out the full written guide, link in the description. Okay, so we'll be looking at title 4, which is Do we underestimate the challenges of taking knowledge out of its original context and transferring it to a different context? And for this one, you can use whichever two AOKs you like. Let's begin with some key terms. So the first one to pick out would be the phrase to underestimate the challenges, which can be defined as a failure to fully grasp the complexity of a task, which can result in misguided expectations or oversights. Also important is transferring knowledge, and this can be defined in some different ways. It can mean the act of disseminating knowledge to a new context, applying knowledge to a new context, or interpreting it through a different lens. Um, so the original context we can define as the initial setting in which a piece of knowledge was created, understood, or applied, and this context can encompass a range of factors including cultural, historical, societal, academic, etc. And of course, a different context would just be a setting distinct from the original. Right, some points to consider when answering this question. You do have to think about some different challenges we might face when transferring knowledge from one context to another. Think about both overt and more subtle challenges, so anything from language barriers to cultural nuances. And do bear in mind that talking about some of these less obvious challenges could make your argument more interesting. Also, need to consider the reasons why someone might underestimate these challenges. So it could be anything from faulty assumptions, cognitive biases, societal pressures, or just general overconfidence and hubris. I'd also recommend reflecting on the moral responsibilities that come with transferring knowledge, especially in the transfer of knowledge to a new culture or society. Right, let's get into our AOKs. The first one I have chosen is the human sciences. Beginning with a quick introduction to put this AOK in the context of the prompt, we can say that given the inherent complexity and diversity of cultures, societies, and individual experiences, it is a pretty formidable task to generalize or transfer findings from one context to another in a seamless manner. And this leads us into the claim, in which we can make the argument that experts can fail to account for political or societal differences between countries. So for this, we're focusing on the knowledge framework element of perspectives. And we can use an example from economics, namely the unsuccessful 2016 IMF supported economic reform program in Egypt. So basically, what happened was the IMF's economic model did not adequately take into account the country's unique political and societal situation in that point in time, which led to a series of policy failures. For the counterclaim, we can push back against this and say that actually experts do take these challenges into account, namely with regards to cultural sensitivities. So this for this counterclaim, we're focusing more on the element of ethics, and we can say that this sensitivity to cultural differences is reflected both in the objectives of a lot of research and the manner in which it is conducted. A notable example being the work by medical anthropologist and psychiatrist Brandon Court, who's done a lot to adapt psychosocial interventions for mental health reasons in Nepal. So, bring these ideas together in a mini conclusion, we can concede that whilst oversights do happen in areas which are harder to predict, such as economics, as I briefly touched on, but experts in the human sciences generally understand and attempt to account for the range of contextual challenges they face. Moving on now to our second AOK, which is history. Again, beginning with a quick introduction, we can say that transferring historical knowledge from its original setting to another is complex and often results in oversimplifications and misinterpretations. this process is, of course, vulnerable to bias and distortion as well. For the claim, focusing on perspectives again, we can talk about how in certain cases, those who present interpretations of particularly controversial historical events in a modern context, can underestimate the challenges of doing this in an objective and accurate manner. So an example we can use here is the 1619 project, which seeks to critique long-standing narratives surrounding slavery and the origins of the United States. And this project has received praise for the perspective and insights it's provided. However, those behind it have been forced to issue clarifications and re-edit certain sections of their website after receiving strong criticism regarding historical accuracy of certain claims they made, which critics contend were based more on ideology than fact. For the counterclaim, we'll push back against this and say that we do take care generally when it comes to transferring historical knowledge to another context. And for this, we'll focus specifically on media adaptations of historical events. I mean, okay, you can say that there are plenty of examples of really wildly inaccurate historical films and series, but in many cases, those who adapt and repackage historical stories for a modern audience take great care in doing so. So, whilst there is always going to be a degree of creative license taken, many film production teams often undertake extensive research and consult with historians and other experts to ensure accuracy in their works. A good example of this is in the recent film, which you've no doubt heard of, Oppenheimer, which contains a lot of dialogue that came directly from a US Senate hearing, declassified FBI documents, and other verified archival records. So, bring these ideas together once again in a mini conclusion, we can say that great care is typically taken when transferring historical knowledge to a modern context, though we do still need to be mindful of the challenges posed by personal and political beliefs on this process. So, those were just some quick thoughts on Title 4. For essay guides and personal feedback, feel free to check out my website, toklifeline.com. And thank you so much for watching.